Chipotle once proclaimed itself the healthy alternative to traditional fast food.
Robert, good morning. This is one of the 43 Chipotle locations that have been shut down across Washington.
Meanwhile, health officials in Ohio are investigating hundreds of reports of illness linked to a Chipotle restaurant.
Now, before I get into all the juicy details regarding Chipotle, there is just one thing that I have to say, and that is the fact that I actually used to work at Chipotle myself. So if anyone who is still working at that Chipotle is watching this video, please don't sue me. On September 12th of 1966, a man by the name of Steve Ells was born in Indiana. There aren't many details regarding Steve's childhood, but what we do know is that he grew up in Boulder, Colorado, alongside the fact that his dad, Bob Ells, had a lot, and I mean a lot of money, which will be important later on. Steve graduates high school, goes to college, and graduates college with a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history. But after Steve graduated high school, he said, "Man, I don't give a fuck about art history, I'm trying to be a chef." So he enrolls in the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, and 2 years later he graduates with a culinary degree. Steve was always infatuated with cooking from an early age, but even with this infatuation, he always had his sights set on starting up a high-end restaurant of his own. But if he was going to own a high-end restaurant, he would first have to work at a high-end restaurant. So upon collecting his culinary degree, he started working as a sous chef under Jeremiah Tower at Star's restaurant in San Francisco. Unfortunately, this restaurant is not open anymore, but while Steve was working as a chef, he fantasized of opening up a fancy restaurant of his own. So in 1993, Steve started Chipotle. You see, Chipotle was never a main focus of Steve's, but rather something that would aid him in one day starting this dream restaurant of his. If he could successfully build up Chipotle, he would then be able to use that success to funnel it into this fancy restaurant. But how would Steve go about starting Chipotle? I mean, sure, he had worked as a chef and he clearly had his sights set on the type of food he was going to serve, but as far as business went, Steve was definitely not a businessman at the time, nor did he have the money to even start Chipotle. So with all of this in mind, Steve decides to go to one man and one man only. A man who he knows very well. A man who has a lot of money. So despite Steve's family and even his peers doubting his idea, he was able to convince his dad to loan him the $75,000 he needed, in which he would convert a broken down ice cream shop in Denver, Colorado into the first ever Chipotle. On day one of Chipotle, it was only Steve alongside 2 other prep cooks, but despite this, they were actually able to make a few $100s in sales. The next day, their sales doubled and they didn't even have a menu yet, nor had Chipotle been marketed. In fact, people would come into the store, see that there was no menu, and Steve would literally go up to customers individually and try to persuade them into getting a burrito. Surprisingly, within the first week, Steve was already exceeding that initial goal of 114 burritos a day. By the end of the year, he wanted to make a $24,000 profit from Chipotle, in which he outlined how he would do this in a business plan. But by the end of the first month, Steve was now selling 1,000 burritos a day, meaning that he was not only meeting his goal, but he was absolutely demolishing it. What started off as a side hustle was now becoming an opportunity that was simply too good to give up. But how did Chipotle almost catapult itself to success overnight? Well, for starters, Steve chose a really good location for the store, as it was not only right outside the University of Denver, but there wasn't really much competition within the area, which made Chipotle stand out. Not to mention that Chipotle was fast and simple. There wasn't much on the menu at the time, but what was on the menu was more than worth the price. And as we all know, Chipotle is famous for making the food as you are ordering it, meaning that customers were more inclined to come in to try Chipotle purely off the fact that they would be in and out of the store within a matter of minutes. If someone didn't like Chipotle, they could just go on about their day, because it's not like they were in the restaurant for an hour. But if someone did like Chipotle, then they would come back over and over again because of how convenient it is to buy. Chipotle's success would continue to rise, but by 1995, it still only had its one location in Denver. Steve was very happy that he was able to succeed succeed with Chipotle, and so are all the people around him. In fact, his parents had become so pro-Chipotle that they were able to gather $1.5 million from wealthy people they knew in the pursuit of funneling that money as an investment into Steve's business. Nonetheless, Steve never meant for Chipotle to become his main gig, as he still had dreams of opening that fancy restaurant. So after 2 years of Chipotle, he had a decision to make. He could either give the reins of the company to someone else so that he could finally pursue his fine dining fantasy, or he could continue to ride the wave that was this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But truth be told, Steve had absolutely no idea what the next move would be, so he just stuck with Chipotle for the time being because that's what was working. It's also worth mentioning that Chipotle's market had rapidly expanded since its initial opening, because not only did they add a lot to their menu, but like I said earlier, investments were pouring in. Instead of Chipotle just serving burritos and tacos, they now served bowls, which were just burritos without the tortilla, and since they were serving bowls, they now served salads, which were just bowls but with lettuce, and of course they eventually added quesadillas, because if you have tortillas and cheese, you might as well have a quesadilla. Sure, the ingredients in most of these items are very similar to one another, but the ingredients themselves just offered so much potential because there were so many different ways in which they could be packaged and served to customers. Looking to cut? Get a salad. Want to bulk up? Get a protein burrito. Want a quesadilla? Get a fucking quesadilla! So given the simplicity alongside the vast market, it's no wonder that Chipotle was able to rise to success so quickly. But after some deliberate thought, Steve decided to open up another Chipotle in Colorado. And since we're still in 1995, Steve still wanted that fine dining restaurant, and so he made Chipotle simple to operate in the hopes of collecting the profits from it to funnel into his restaurant. But if it wasn't obvious by now, things would become too big for Steve to pass up, and so his fancy restaurant would never see the light of day because Chipotle was too busy taking over the world. While Chipotle was experiencing a lot of growth, it still only had its 2 locations, and by 1998, it had expanded to 13 stores. Nonetheless, Chipotle was still a Colorado exclusive, but in that same year, Chipotle received an unexpected but game-changing offer. You see, McDonald's was in a bit of trouble during the late 1990s. As far as profit and business goes, they were thriving, but they were still in a bit of trouble when it came to other endeavors. The first reason for their trouble was the fact that Wall Street, which is home to the largest financial districts in the world, believed that McDonald's was not diversifying its company enough. So because of Wall Street, McDonald's tried to build separate restaurants, but those all flopped because they ended up taking sales away from McDonald's itself. So come 1998, they invest $50 million into Chipotle, which by the way, this is a very small amount in contrast to the $1.6 billion they made that same year. But for Chipotle, this was incredibly huge because they got access to a massive supply chain, loads of advice, potential to expand their restaurant across the country, and McDonald's was nice enough to not push anything onto Chipotle. Over the next 7 years, Chipotle would go from 13 stores all the way to 500. They were still within the confines of the United States, but thanks to McDonald's, they were now all over the country. McDonald's and Chipotle seemed to be a match made in heaven, as they both reeked in all sorts of benefits, but as time progressed, Chipotle would become increasingly unhappy with McDonald's. In the early 2000s, Chipotle would create this slogan and use it as an advertisement. The slogan said, and I quote, "Usually, when you roll something this good, it's illegal." Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think this is an absolutely perfect slogan, but Chipotle would catch heat for this. But despite catching heat for this, Chipotle would keep it all the way until McDonald's interfered, in which they finally made the decision to get rid of the slogan. During the same time, people from McDonald's would tell Steve to start doing drive-thrus or to start serving breakfast food, but anytime the people from McDonald's would suggest anything, Steve would usually say no because he wanted to do things his way. Thankfully, McDonald's didn't force Chipotle into doing anything, but this did cause tension between the two, and what made things worse is that investors were asking for co-branded McDonald's and Chipotle restaurants, but obviously that was not going to happen because the two CEOs did not see eye to eye when it came to food alongside customer service. So when 2006 came around, McDonald's would officially split with Chipotle. Despite Chipotle splitting with McDonald's, it would continue to see success and more locations would open up across the country, not to mention that the first Chipotle outside of America would be opened in 2008. But when 2015 came around, Chipotle would find itself amidst large controversy. People around Washington and Oregon would start to report E. coli outbreaks, which if you don't know what E. coli is, it's a harmful bacteria that can not only infect unsanitary food, but it can also infect human beings. And if you contract E. coli, you'll get all sorts of nasty symptoms, including severe stomach cramps, vomiting, a fever, or even bloody diarrhea. So as you can imagine, when these E. coli outbreaks happened, people very quickly connected the outbreaks to the Chipotles in Oregon and Washington. Since the whole world was basically shitting on Chipotle at this point, or more so, shitting out Chipotle, they needed to act fast because its reputation was already diminishing. So they had the CDC, aka the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, come investigate the 50 cases that had come out, and well, they found out that only 37 of the cases were connected to Chipotle, which, you know, is an improvement from 50, but that's still one too many people getting E. coli from Chipotle. But just 2 years later, Steve would actually step down as CEO, and the new man in charge was a guy who went by the name of Brian Nicolai. Chipotle's stocks were once again up after the announcement of the new CEO, and Chipotle would continue to expand free of any controversy. But in the summer of 2022, I would apply for Chipotle. Now, Chipotle may be booming with success, but if it keeps up the antics it's been pulling behind the scenes, then I have no doubt that it will be unsuccessful within the next few decades, and I'm gonna tell you why. When I worked at Chipotle, which I worked as a crew member for about a year, I honestly enjoyed most of my time there because the people I was working with were for the most part super sweet. However, the business behind Chipotle is not super sweet. First and foremost, you may have noticed how Chipotle has raised its prices similar to just about every other food place because of inflation. However, Chipotle is not just raising its prices, it is simultaneously giving you a bit less of food. Let's say you get yourself a double chicken bowl. If I put 2 full scoops of chicken in that bowl, I would get yelled at and would be told to put 1.5. The first time I got called out for this, I asked why, and my coworker went on about how we should always give the customer the minimum amount of food that maximize both profit but to also save product unless otherwise disclosed. Now, to be fair, we were more lenient on products such as salsa, but when it came to meat, bare minimum. Guacamole, bare minimum. Queso, bare minimum. And the same can be said about the chips, because there is a certain amount of ounces that both the large and regular chips are advertised as, but the reality is that we usually go an ounce or 2 below because the company is so adamant when it comes to optimization. But what they fail to realize is that the charge 2% more, give 2% less strategy will only get you so far. Chipotle may be doing fine business wise, and they haven't had any outbreaks since 2015, at least not to my knowledge, but as someone who has seen the inside operations of the place, I believe that Chipotle will at some point fail if the company continues to operate the way it does, because the reason it was so successful in the first place was because of the hospitality of people like Steve, who would go out of their way to just make sure the customer felt valued. Not to mention that they weren't trying to optimize every single little thing. So Chipotle, step it up and please don't sue me.